Laura had once imagined her life as something steady and peaceful. A home filled with laughter, a husband who loved her, and a family that felt whole. For a time, she had it all. But fate doesn't ask permission before taking things away. After Daniel's sudden death, the house that once echoed with warmth now felt hollow. The walls were silent. The bed was too big. The air itself carried the weight of memories she could no longer bear to face. Daniel's son, Ethan, had gone away to college before the accident. He hadn't visited much even when his father was alive. He was polite but distant, always keeping his emotions hidden behind a quiet, unreadable face. After Daniel's passing, Ethan had sent a few messages to check on her, but their words were short, careful, and formal. It felt like speaking to a stranger. Months passed. Laura kept herself busy with small things, cleaning, gardening, pretending she was fine. But she wasn't. Every time she walked past Daniel's old study or saw his jacket still hanging in the closet, a deep ache pulled at her chest. Nights were the hardest. Sometimes she would sit by the fireplace holding a photo of them together, whispering words to the man who could no longer answer. One gray afternoon, when rain began to fall against the windows, Laura heard a car pulling up outside. She looked through the curtains and froze. It was Ethan. He was standing beside his car, rain dripping from his jacket, a small suitcase in hand. He looked older, his features sharper, his voice deeper. But there was something in his eyes that caught her off guard, concern. She opened the door before he could knock. "Ethan," she said, unsure if her voice sounded surprised or relieved. He gave a small nod. "Hi, Laura. I thought, maybe you shouldn't be alone tonight." For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Then she simply stepped aside and let him in. The warmth of the house embraced them both, though it felt strange at first. He placed his bag by the stairs, looking around quietly. Nothing had changed. Same old furniture, same framed photos. But there was a tension in the air that neither of them wanted to name. "I made tea," she offered, trying to sound calm. "You still take honey, right?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, thanks." They sat at the dining table, the same one Daniel used to sit at every morning with his newspaper. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the windows like 1,000 tiny reminders that time never really stops. "How's school?" she asked gently. "Good," he replied. "Busy. I just needed a break." His words were simple, but something about the way he said them felt deeper. He wasn't just here for a break. He was here because something inside him was missing too. Laura nodded, keeping her gaze on the teacup in her hands. "I'm glad you came." He looked at her then, really looked. Her hair had grown longer since the last time he saw her. There were faint lines under her eyes, not from age, but from sleepless nights. She looked fragile, yet strong in a quiet way. "You don't have to keep pretending you're okay," he said softly. Laura blinked, surprised by this sudden honesty. She opened her mouth to respond, but couldn't find words. Instead, tears began to fall before she could stop them. She turned away, wiping them quickly, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to," but Ethan stood and walked to her side. Without saying anything, he placed his hand over hers. His touch was gentle but steady. "You don't have to apologize for missing him," he said. "I miss him too." Something inside Laura broke open then. For so long she had been trying to be strong, to hold everything together. But hearing those simple words, "I miss him too," was enough to make her crumble. She leaned into his shoulder, and for the first time in months, she allowed herself to cry freely. They stayed like that for a long while. The storm outside raged, but inside there was peace. Fragile, unfamiliar, but real. Ethan didn't say much. He just let her cry, quietly holding her hand until her sobs softened into silence. When she finally looked up, her eyes were red, but her heart felt lighter. "Thank you," she whispered. He smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me." Later that evening, they cooked dinner together. It was awkward at first, both unsure how to act. Ethan chopped vegetables while Laura tried to remember Daniel's favorite recipe for stew. They moved around each other carefully, like two dancers learning the steps for the first time. But as the smell of cooking filled the kitchen, something shifted. They began to talk about college, about life, about the memories of Daniel that still made them smile. For the first time in a long while, the house didn't feel so empty. After dinner, they sat in the living room by the fire. Ethan noticed a photo of Daniel on the mantel, him smiling, arm around Laura. He stared at it for a while before speaking. "He loved you a lot, you know," he said. Laura's eyes softened. "And I loved him more than anything." Ethan turned toward her, his expression thoughtful. "I never told you this, but after he died, I didn't know how to come back here. Everything reminded me of him. I thought it would hurt too much." She nodded, understanding. "I felt the same. I still do." There was a quiet pause. Then Ethan said, almost in a whisper, "But maybe coming back is what we both needed." Laura looked at him, really looked, and for a fleeting moment something warm and unfamiliar stirred in her chest. It wasn't romantic. Not yet. It was something deeper, the feeling of connection, of shared grief. Two souls finding comfort where they least expected it. The clock ticked softly in the background. The rain began to ease. A calm settled over the room, like the world itself was giving them a moment to breathe again. Before heading to bed, Ethan stood by the window, watching the rain fade into mist. "Good night, Laura," he said quietly. "Good night, Ethan," she replied, her voice soft but steady. When he went upstairs, Laura stayed in the living room for a while longer, staring at the empty space beside her. The house didn't feel quite so lonely anymore. She could still feel the warmth of his hand from earlier, the simple kindness that had reminded her what it meant to be seen. For the first time since Daniel's death, she allowed herself to hope. Maybe this visit wasn't just about comfort. Maybe it was the beginning of something new, something fragile, unspoken, and healing. And as she turned off the last light and climbed the stairs, Laura didn't feel completely alone anymore. Ethan had brought a quiet warmth back into her life, one she hadn't realized she was missing. Outside, the rain had stopped. Inside, the silence no longer hurt. For the first time in years, Laura fell asleep with peace in her heart, unaware that the storm that had brought Ethan home was only the beginning of Tony Tay's. FNAAMT was only the beginning of confluence. Like, look at this. Look at this. And we all know I've been exploring. I've been exploring that. And we all know I've been exploring that back. Laura fell asleep, with peace. I will realize we make as a gev. Unlies we made with thurs. FM/Khalid, we made a bisar. I've didn't wise I would. I've said sigh with we said by we get if we said sefim way if we said you et can I with gakli I could ska for sa covered with kun with the two with it luck I sick a kayuta so I seft it I if you could kiski you did us you there to guy cut a cue with the guy with so we've in a cue with the cup with quit I we will I would get the I read you man I think I could eat that when we would cut I can't something that would change them both forever. The storm hit without warning that weekend. Heavy rain pounded the roof and wind shook the windows of the old house. The lights flickered and then went out completely, leaving Laura and Ethan in darkness. She fumbled for candles, lighting a few around the living room, their soft glow casting long shadows on the walls. The storm outside was fierce, but inside a quiet tension built. A feeling neither could name. Ethan had stayed the night, claiming it was too dangerous to drive in the storm. Laura had agreed silently, though her heart had raced when he suggested it. Something about having him there made the house feel less empty, less haunted by the memories of Daniel. Even without the lights, the warmth of the room seemed enough to keep the cold and fear at bay. They wrapped themselves in blankets. Sitting on the couch near the fire that had been lit earlier, the flickering candlelight made everything look golden, almost magical. Laura could feel Ethan's presence beside her, steady and comforting. She hadn't realized how much she had missed this. The sound of another heartbeat, the weight of a hand near hers. The simple knowledge that someone cared. The storm outside roared, but the room remained quiet. They talked about small things at first, the groceries that needed restocking, the repairs the house needed, the rain that had flooded the garden. but gradually their words grew softer, slower, filled with the pauses of unspoken feelings. Laura watched Ethan's face in the candlelight. He had grown taller, stronger, and his eyes had a depth she hadn't seen before. There was a seriousness to him now, a quiet understanding of the world and of pain. I never knew how hard it would be without him. Ethan said suddenly, his voice low, almost swallowed by the storm. I thought I'd be okay, but I wasn't. Laura's chest tightened. She knew exactly what he meant. Thought I could manage, she whispered. But some days it's too much. I still feel like I'm just pretending. He nodded, not judging, just listening. And in that quiet, Laura felt something shift. For the first time since the accident, she didn't have to hold herself together. She could simply exist, sad, tired, and fragile, and he would still be there. The wind howled, and a sudden crash of thunder made her flinch. Before she could move, Ethan reached out and held her hand. His grip was firm and reassuring. It's okay, he said gently. I'm here. You don't have to be brave all the time. Her eyes met his, and in that moment she felt a wave of relief wash over her. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes. She tried to smile, but it faltered, replaced by quiet gratitude. Ethan's presence was filling a part of her she hadn't realized was empty. Not with words, not with gestures, but with simple human care. They talked about Daniel, sharing memories that made them both laugh and cry. Ethan remembered the silly jokes his father used to make, the way he'd insist on having pancakes every Sunday, the quiet evenings reading by the fireplace. Laura remembered the moments she had loved most, the way Daniel's hand would find hers at the dinner table, the way he had listened when she felt she couldn't speak to anyone else. The storm continued outside, but inside a gentle connection grew between them. Laura could feel her heart opening slowly, cautiously. She had been afraid of emotions, afraid of letting someone in too close, but Ethan's presence was different. It was safe. It was honest. It was warm. Ethan shifted closer, brushing a stray strand of hair from Laura's face. The motion was small, almost accidental, but it carried care and attention. Laura felt her breath catch. She looked away, feeling the sudden heat in her cheeks. But Ethan didn't pull back. He didn't rush or press. He simply stayed near, letting her feel the comfort of his nearness. Minutes passed in silence, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the patter of rain against the windows. Laura finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I never realized how much I needed this. Someone here, someone to care, someone who understands. Ethan's eyes softened. You don't have to say it aloud, he said gently. I see it. I understand. And you don't have to do this alone anymore. The candlelight flickered again, shadows dancing across their faces. Laura felt a connection, a bond that had been invisible until now, solidifying in the quiet intensity of the stormy night. She realized that she was not just lonely anymore. She was seen, truly seen, by someone who had been part of her life all along, yet had grown into someone new. The room felt warmer as they shared stories and memories. Laughter broke through the tension, brief but genuine. Ethan's quiet humor made Laura smile in a way she hadn't in months. The storm outside was relentless, but inside there was a fragile, comforting peace. Then, as if sensing the exact moment, Ethan reached out and gently took her hand in both of his. Laura didn't pull away. The gesture wasn't romantic in a physical sense, but it was intimate, meaningful, full of trust and care. She realized then that this was what she had been longing for, someone to fill the emptiness left by loss. Not with words or gifts, but with steady presence and understanding. Time passed unnoticed. The storm finally began to fade, the rain softening to a gentle drizzle. Outside, the world looked washed clean, quiet after the chaos. Inside, Laura and Ethan remained close, sitting side by side, letting the silence speak for them. Thank you for staying, Laura said softly, her voice full of emotion. Ethan smiled faintly. I should be the one thanking you. You've reminded me what it feels like to be home, to be understood, to feel safe. The night deepened, but neither moved. They sat together, letting the storm's echo fade into memory, understanding that something had changed between them. They weren't just two people bound by tragedy. They were two souls learning how to heal together. Slowly, cautiously, with care. Finally, Laura stood to blow out the candles, but paused when she noticed Ethan watching her, his eyes gentle and full of unspoken words. A quiet tension lingered. Not uncomfortable, not wrong, but delicate. It was the awareness of connection, of shared grief, and of a bond that neither had anticipated. As she climbed the stairs to bed, she felt warmth in her chest. The house no longer felt empty. The night, though stormy, had brought something unexpected. A closeness, shared comfort that neither could deny. Ethan's presence had filled something inside her. It was not love in the romantic sense yet, but it was deeper than companionship. It was trust. It was care. It was the realization that she could let someone in without fear, and that doing so didn't make her weak. It made her alive again. And as the storm finally passed and the first light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, Laura understood that this night, though brief, had changed everything. The house, once hollow, now felt like home. Her heart, once cautious, now felt the warmth of connection. Ethan had filled a space inside her she hadn't even realized was empty, and neither of them would ever forget this night. The night when a storm outside brought them together, healing old wounds and showing them that even after loss, there is room for warmth, trust, and the beginning of something beautiful. The days after the storm felt lighter, almost surreal. The heavy tension that had hung over Laura's house seemed to have softened, replaced by something new, something tentative but real. Ethan stayed for another week, claiming the roads were still unsafe. But Laura sensed that there was more to his stay than just the weather. Every time he was near, the house felt warmer, as if his presence had somehow filled the empty corners left by loss. They began to share small routines. Mornings were quiet, filled with the smell of coffee and toast. Ethan would read while Laura prepared breakfast. And though they rarely spoke at first, there was a comfortable rhythm in the silence. It was a different kind of conversation, one of gestures and glances, the simple understanding of each other's presence. Laura realized how much she had missed this kind of closeness, the intimacy of sharing a space with someone who truly cared. Without the need for words, afternoons were spent tidying up the house, organizing old photographs and repairing small things that had been neglected for months. Ethan was careful and attentive, often pausing to smile at memories captured in pictures or to comment on something Laura hadn't noticed in years. She began to see him not as the boy who had left for college, but as a young man who carried a quiet strength and wisdom beyond his years, despite the comfort of routines. There was a tension that neither wanted to acknowledge. Every brush of hands, every lingering look carried an unspoken weight. Laura found herself thinking about Ethan constantly, wondering what he was feeling, what he was thinking. She was drawn to his quiet patience, his ability to sit with her in silence without judgment, his way of making her feel seen in ways no one else had. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the kitchen, Laura asked casually, "Ethan, maybe you should head back to school soon. Classes start again, right?" He paused, his hands stilling over the dishes he had been washing. There was a flicker in his eyes, a hesitation that Laura hadn't expected. "Is that what you want?" he asked softly, almost too quietly to hear. Laura froze. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was heavy. "It's what's right," she said, her voice steady but calm. She turned to continue cleaning, avoiding his gaze, trying to mask the flutter in her chest. Ethan set the dishes down carefully and stepped closer. "I don't know what's right anymore, Laura," he said, his voice firm yet gentle. "All I know is, when I'm here, I feel whole again." Her breath caught. She stopped moving, her hands gripping the counter. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she hadn't allowed herself to see before: raw honesty. There was no pretense in his eyes, no attempt to hide his emotions. He was simply telling her what he felt, letting her in without fear or hesitation. Laura's heart raced. A mixture of longing, guilt, and something she couldn't name. "Please," She whispered, almost pleading. "Don't make this harder than it already is." It then didn't argue. He nodded slowly, a shadow of pain flickering across his face. He understood, even if his heart ached. Without another word, he stepped back and left the room, leaving Laura alone with the sound of her own thoughts and the quiet ticking of the clock. That night, Laura lay awake, replaying the conversation over and over in her mind. She thought about the way he had looked at her, the way his words had filled the empty spaces inside her. She realized then that she wasn't just lonely. She had found someone who could see her completely, who could understand her in ways she hadn't thought possible. The realization was both thrilling and terrifying. The next morning, she awoke to a quiet house. The sunlight streamed gently through the curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced in the golden light. She noticed a small envelope on the kitchen table, neatly placed as if waiting for her. Her hands trembled slightly as she picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, neatly written in Ethan's careful handwriting. "Laura, you taught me how to care again. You showed me that family isn't just about blood, it's about those who stay when everyone else leaves. I don't want to lose that. But I also don't want to hurt you. So I'll go, if you ask me to." Her chest tightened as she read the words. They were simple, but they carried a depth of emotion that left her speechless. She folded the letter slowly, her mind racing. Ethan had given her so much warmth, comfort, understanding, and now he was offering her the choice to keep it or let it go. As she stood there, holding the letter, she felt a wave of emotions crash over her. Guilt mingled with longing, fear intertwined with hope. She realized that for months she had been living half a life, holding herself back from feeling fully, from letting anyone in. And now Ethan had brought her to a point where she had to confront her own desires, her own heart. When she heard footsteps on the stairs, she turned. Ethan appeared in the doorway, suitcase in hand, ready to leave. His eyes were filled with a mixture of resolve and sorrow. He looked at her silently, waiting for her decision. Laura stepped toward him, her voice trembling but firm. "Ethan," she whispered, "don't stop. Don't stop caring about me. You've already given me more peace than I've felt in years." He paused, uncertainty flickering across his face. Then, slowly, a small smile broke through, and his eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I'm not going anywhere, Laura. Not unless you tell me to." The tension in the room eased, replaced by a quiet understanding. They didn't speak further, but the words hung in the air, unspoken yet fully understood. They were no longer bound by the past, no longer held back by grief alone. There were two people who had found each other in the aftermath of loss, learning to navigate the fragile lines between care, affection, and trust. Over the next few days, they moved through the house with a new rhythm. They shared meals, stories, and quiet moments without forcing conversation. Every glance, every smile, every simple gesture became a way of communicating feelings that words couldn't capture. Laura began to notice how much lighter her steps felt, how her laughter returned naturally, and how the ache in her heart had softened. Ethan, too, seemed changed. He carried himself with more confidence, but there was a gentleness in his actions, a thoughtfulness that spoke of someone who had learned to value connection and presence over distance and avoidance. He no longer seemed like the boy who had left for college years ago, but a young man who had grown into himself, while carrying the love of his family in his heart. They began to understand each other without needing explanations. A shared look, a small touch on the arm, a quiet smile across the room, these gestures conveyed everything words could not. And in those moments, Laura realized what it truly meant to be seen by someone, to feel understood, valued, and emotionally fulfilled in a way that went far beyond companionship. By the end of the week, Laura and Ethan had formed a bond that was both fragile and unbreakable. It was built on trust, shared grief, and the slow realization that they had become essential to each other's lives. The storm had passed, but its impact lingered, leaving them both with a newfound awareness of their connection and the promise of something deeper, something lasting. Laura understood, finally, that this was what it meant to be emotionally filled completely, not through words alone, not through gestures alone, but through the steady presence of someone who cared, someone who understood, and someone who would stay. And as she watched Ethan pack the last of his things, she knew that no matter what the future held, they had discovered a bond that would endure, a bond forged in loss, comforted by presence, and strengthened by unspoken words of the heart. The morning after the letter appeared on the kitchen table, the house felt different. The storm had passed, leaving behind a sky washed in soft golden gray. Sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced lazily in the air. Laura sat at the kitchen table, the letter from Ethan still in her hands, rereading the words again and again. Each time they seemed to echo in her chest, filling the spaces that had felt hollow for so long. She thought about the past few weeks, the stormy night, the quiet conversations, the shared laughter, the tears, and the moments of silent understanding. Everything had led to this point, to this delicate balance between grief, longing, and hope. She realized that Ethan had brought her more than comfort. He had reminded her what it felt like to feel fully alive, to let someone in without fear. Her heart, once cautious and guarded, now beat with a warmth she hadn't felt in years. Ethan was still upstairs, probably checking on his things before leaving for college. Laura's gaze drifted to the staircase. She felt a mix of emotions, gratitude, longing, and the faintest hint of fear. She had grown to depend on his presence in ways she hadn't expected. The house no longer felt empty, but the thought of him leaving threatened to bring it back to silence. The creak of footsteps on the stairs made her look up. Ethan appeared in the doorway, suitcase in hand, his expression calm but uncertain. His eyes met hers, and in that quiet moment, all the unspoken words between them seemed to gather, heavy and full of meaning. "Laura," he said softly, "I should go. I don't want to overstep, but I also don't want to hurt you by staying if it's too much." Her chest tightened. She stood and took a step toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "Ethan, don't go. Not yet, not like this." He hesitated, the faintest flicker of hope in his eyes. "Are you sure? I don't want to make things harder than they already are." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "I'm sure. I don't want to be alone anymore, not when I've realized what we've found in each other." Ethan's features softened, and he set the suitcase down carefully. The tension that had been between them since the day she found his letter seemed to ease. Laura felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sense of peace that came from knowing that they had both chosen this, chosen to stay, chosen to care, chosen to let their connection grow without fear or guilt. They sat together in the living room, the sunlight now filtering through the curtains and casting a gentle glow around them. For a long time, neither spoke. They simply existed in the quiet presence of one another, feeling the steady rhythm of shared comfort and understanding. Laura realized then that filled completely wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about small, meaningful moments, shared laughter, quiet conversations, the simple touch of a hand, the knowledge that someone truly sees you. Finally, Laura spoke, her voice steady but soft. "Ethan, you've given me something I didn't know I needed. You've reminded me that I can feel again, that I can trust again, that I can be happy again. I don't want to lose this." Ethan reached out and took her hand, holding it gently but firmly. "You won't lose it," he said. "I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to. And I don't think either of us would want that." Laura felt a lump rise in her throat. The fear and uncertainty that had lingered for so long were dissolving, replaced by a calm certainty. She realized that love, in its purest form, wasn't about possession or control. It was about care, presence, and trust. Ethan had filled her life with all of those things, slowly and quietly, and she was finally ready to accept them. They spent the afternoon together, talking about everything and nothing at all. They shared memories of Daniel, laughed at old stories, and even allowed themselves a few moments of lighthearted teasing. The house, once so heavy with silence and sorrow, now felt alive. Their connection was growing, not with urgency or pressure, but with patience and understanding. As evening approached, they moved to the porch. wrapped in blankets and watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky was painted with soft pinks and golds, a perfect backdrop for the quiet intimacy that had blossomed between them. Laura leaned against Ethan's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, a reminder of the comfort and safety he had brought back into her life. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," Laura admitted softly. "I didn't know it was possible to heal so completely, to let someone fill the emptiness inside me." Ethan smiled, resting his head gently against hers. "Neither did I, but being here with you, it feels right. Like this is where we're meant to be, at least for now." They stayed on the porch long after the sun had set, watching the stars appear one by one in the clear night sky. There was no rush, no expectation. Just the quiet understanding that they had found something rare, a bond built on shared grief, trust, and the willingness to care deeply for one another later. As they returned inside, Laura felt a sense of completion she hadn't known she could feel. The emptiness that had haunted her for months was gone, replaced by warmth and a profound sense of connection. Ethan had filled her life, not just with his presence, but with understanding, patience, and the courage to let herself feel again. That night, as they prepared for bed, they didn't need to speak of what had happened or what might come next. The knowledge of their bond was enough. Laura felt her heart swell with gratitude, realizing that life could be beautiful even after loss, and that sometimes love appears in forms you least expect. Before going to sleep, Laura paused by the window, looking out at the quiet neighborhood. The storm had passed, leaving behind a calm that mirrored her own feelings. She felt hope for the first time in months, a certainty that she and Ethan had discovered something worth holding on to. It wasn't just companionship, it was trust, healing, the quiet assurance that they could face the world together, no matter what came next. Ethan came to the doorway, smiling softly. "Good night, Laura," he said. "Good night, Ethan," she replied, her voice calm and full of emotion as she lay in bed that night. Laura realized that her life had changed in ways she hadn't imagined. Ethan had filled the spaces inside her heart that she thought would always remain empty. He had brought warmth, understanding, and the quiet strength that she had needed to begin living fully again. And as sleep claimed her, Laura knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she had found someone who would stay, someone who would care, and someone who had filled her completely emotionally, spiritually, and with the quiet joy of being truly seen.